Welcome friends to our BIOS editing course. In this sessions we are going to introduce the BIOS, what is a BIOS and what are the regions and all. So you know that the BIOS is basically the hardware chips and the BIOS number start from the 25. So here you can see the BIOS number start from 25. Whenever you see the BIOS 2, whenever you see on the chip the 25, that means that chip is a BIOS. So this is a basically identification of the BIOS, and the last two digits or three digits indicate the size. So here the mention 64, that means this BIOS is a 64 megabit. If it is a mention 128, then the BIOS size will be 128 megabit. And if it is a mention 256, then that means the BIOS size is a 256 megabit. Okay, it's a bits, not bytes. If you want to convert into byte, then you have to multiply by 8. So it's like that. So this the BIOS is a make normally by Winmon or Eons. These are the normally main manufacturer of the BIOS. So the BIOS is a 8 leg, and this pin is a pin number 1. Okay, this is a pin number 1. This is a pin number 8. The pin number 8 is basically a supply. It's a power, and the power is basically a 3.3 volt. And the newer BIOS, which number start 25L, the BIOS voltage will be all these BIOS work on 1.8 volt. So the BIOS voltage either at 3.3 volt or 1.8 volt. So depend which chip it is. Okay, this pin number 8 is a ground. Okay, and pin number 1 is a chip select. Pin number 1 is a chip select. Pin number 2 is a read pin. Pin number 6 is a clock. Pin number 6 is a clock. Then pin number 5 is a write. Pin number 5 is a write. So these are the main pin of the BIOS. So pin number 1 is a chip select, pin number 2 is a read, pin number 4 is a ground, pin number 5 is a write pin, then pin number 6 is a clock. Okay, and the pin number 8 is a supply. So the BIOS number start from 25 and the last number indicate the size of the BIOS. Okay, the next thing, the BIOS is connected either to the PCH. It's normally PCH only, but if it is on the 4th generation onward laptop, then it's connected to the CPU, that is the SoC. So BIOS have the different regions. The BIOS is a single file that is either in 8 MB or 16 MB or 32 MB, but within that 8 MB or 16 MB there are different portions, and these portions are called the regions. Okay, the first region is called the descriptor. Descriptor is basically the index page of the BIOS. Just like when we have a books, on that books there is a page called the index page, where the index page tell us about the information about all chapters and where are these chapters are. So similarly, the descriptor is a portion where you tell about the different regions, locations and their size. The second region is called the MA region. The MA region is a security region. When the BIOS start first, you read all the encrypted code within the CPU and outside the CPU. We match both the codes, and if everything is okay, then you proceed for the next section, that is called the BIOS region. BIOS region is actually BIOS where he do all the posts like a power on self test. He do all the power on self test job where he test all the devices. He find any errors or not. If any error, he declare that particular error, otherwise we proceed for the display. And the next section is called the GB. GB stand for Gigabyte Ethernet, that is a MAC ID of the laptop or the desktop. So these are the region, and for next region is called the PDR region. The PDR region, where when we start the laptop, at that time one screen appear, that is a logo appear, that logo is basically stored in that PDR regions. Okay, so in this way this BIOS works. So first, when we start the computer, then when the all powers get stable, then PCH load the clock, and when the CPU load the clocks, PCH load the clock, then he read first the ME region, where he check all the parameters. If all the parameters are okay, then he go to the next session, that he initialize all the keys, open all the locks, and then proceed all the generate all the clocks, and CPU start executing this BIOS region. Okay. So, as I already told you, these are the region. BIOS have the region. Descriptor region is the layout of the flash content. Then the ME region. ME region have the different portion. This is called the Intel Management Engine region, Trusted Engine Execution, Power Management Controller, PCH controller. So these are the different controller. When CPU start, this section start first, and you check all the parameter locks and keys. GB is a Gigabyte Ethernet address mapping. BIOS region. BIOS contain the code and configuration of the entire computer, and the PDR region is where the platform descriptor region, where store the logos of the laptops. So in further divided, the CSMA region is also further divided into the different region. Again, it's called the CSMA region. TXT, that is a Trusted Engine Execution region. PMC, Power Management Controller, PCH controller, and the Type C controller. So normally there are two BIOS in one laptops. One BIOS is called the main BIOS, which is connected to the PCH, and another BIOS is called the EC BIOS, which is connected to the SIO. SIO's BIOS is basically responsible to turn on the laptops and the battery charging, and this BIOS is start before the power button press. Okay, but the main BIOS will start after the power button press, and it's basically responsible to give the display and most of the password there in this main BIOS. ME region also in the main BIOS. Okay, and the main BIOS is going to turn on after only power button press. So whenever you have the problem like no display, at that time you have to flash the main BIOS. But if your laptop is not powering on, then you have to focus on the EC BIOS. In comparison of this both BIOS, the EC BIOS is small in the size, like EC BIOS is size in 128 KB or 256 KB, or say maximum around 512 KB, whereas the main BIOS is basically start from 4 MB, 8 MB, 16 MB, 32 MB, it's like that, the bigger in size. So when you go into any forums where you have to download the particular model BIOS, at that time you have to remember what is the problem. If your problem is a laptop is not powering on, at that time you have to download the EC BIOS and you have to flash EC BIOS. But if you're not giving the display, then you have to download the main BIOS and flash the BIOS. And to clean the ME region, you have to download the main BIOS only. Now in the newer generation laptop, you will see there is only one physical BIOS which is connected to the SoC, and that BIOS is called the main BIOS. Whereas you can't find a EC BIOS outside this SIO. So the EC BIOS there inside into the SIO. That means all these newer SIOs come with the EC BIOS. So to fly that EC BIOS, you need another programmer. It's called the SIO programmer. There are various of SIO programmers are available that you can buy from the market, like ENIT SIO programmer, SOD4. So these are the SIO programmer which you can buy from the market and flash the SIO. The main BIOS is basically connected to the CPU, and already I told you the size of the main BIOS is maybe 8 MB, 16 MB, 32 MB, like that. And when the laptop is not giving display, or suppose you are suspecting that memory region is corrupt, at that time you have to repair this BIOS, or you can download the new BIOS and flash the BIOS, like that. So these are the main BIOS there in the computer system.